The stars had never belonged to humanity. Captain Doyon knew this truth better than most. He had spent 30 years sailing through the black void between worlds, and in all that time, not once had an alien species looked at him with anything but pity or disgust. Humans were small. Humans were weak. Humans were tolerated, nothing more. The year was 2847, and humanity had been part of the Galactic Concord for 300 years. When the first alien ships landed on Earth, humans had celebrated. They thought it was the beginning of a golden age. They were wrong. The Concord classified humanity as a Class 7 primitive species. It was the lowest rank possible for a spacefaring civilization. Humans were considered useful for simple tasks. They could translate languages. They could clean ships. They could die in places where other species refused to go. Dojon stood on the bridge of his ship, the Soul's Hope. It was a small diplomatic vessel, old and slow. The Concord had given it to humanity as a gift, but Doyon knew the truth. It was garbage that other species no longer wanted. He ran his hand along the metal wall and felt the vibration of the engines. This ship was all they had. "Captain, we are approaching the supply station." Lieutenant Una spoke from her console. She was young, barely 30, but her mind was sharper than any blade. She could speak 47 alien languages without error. The Concord used her as a translator at important meetings. They never thanked her, Doyon said. "Let us finish this quickly. I want to go home." Home, Earth, a small blue planet that the galaxy had forgotten. Doyon missed the smell of rain. He missed the sound of birds singing in the morning. Out here in the cold darkness, there was nothing but silence and the hum of machines. The Soul's Hope carried Ambassador Taiho, an old man who had spent his entire life trying to prove that humanity deserved respect. His hair was white now, and his hands shook when he wrote, but his eyes still burned with hope. Doyon admired him for that hope, even if he did not share it. They never reached the supply station. The attack came without warning. 3 ships appeared from behind a nearby moon. They were Veth warships, painted black and red like dried blood. The Veth Dominion was a brutal empire that lived on the edges of Concord space. They raided and killed and took whatever they wanted. The Concord did nothing to stop them. The Concord was afraid. "They're targeting our engines." Una shouted. Doyon grabbed the controls, but it was already too late. The first shot tore through the Soul's Hope like a knife through paper. The ship screamed as metal twisted and broke. Lights died. Gravity failed. Doyon floated in darkness as the second shot hit. When he woke up, he was in chains. The Veth prison was cold and wet. Water dripped from the ceiling and pooled on the floor. The smell of rot filled the air. Doyon counted 12 humans in the cell with him. Una was there, her face bloody, but her eyes still fierce. Ambassador Taiho was there too, lying on the ground, too weak to stand. Others from the crew huddled together in fear, but they were not alone. In the corner of the cell sat a small alien child. She was from a species Dojon did not recognize. Her skin was pale blue, and she had 4 eyes that were filled with tears. She could not have been older than 5 or 6 years in human terms. She was shaking. "Why is she here?" Doyon asked. One of his crew members answered. "The Veth took her from another ship. They killed her parents in front of her." Doyon felt something twist in his chest. He had seen cruelty before. The galaxy was full of it. But looking at this child, so small and so afraid, something inside him began to crack. The Veth guards came every few hours. They enjoyed causing pain. They beat the prisoners and laughed at their screams. On the 3rd day, they came for the child. Doyon watched as a Veth soldier grabbed the girl by her thin arm and dragged her across the floor. She cried out in a language he did not understand, but pain needs no translation. The soldier threw her against the wall and raised a metal rod. "Please, Ambassador," Taiho said weakly. "She is just a child. Please stop." The Veth soldier looked at the old man and smiled. It was not a human smile. It was the smile of a creature that had never known mercy. "Humans," he said, his voice like grinding stones. "So weak, so soft. You cannot even protect yourselves. How will you protect her? The rod came down. The child screamed, "Something broke inside Du Hyon, no." Something woke up. He did not remember standing. He did not remember breaking his chains. Later, the survivors would tell him that the metal links simply snapped like dry twigs. They would tell him that his eyes went empty, like all the light had drained out of them. They would tell him that he did not make a single sound. The first Veth soldier died before he could turn around. Doyen's hands found the creature's throat and crushed it like wet clay. The second soldier swung his weapon, but Doyen moved faster than any human should move. He took the metal rod and drove it through the soldier's chest. 7 soldiers came into the cell. 7 soldiers died. Doyen did not stop when they fell. He did not stop when his hands were covered in blood. He did not stop until Yuna grabbed his arm and shouted his name again and again. Only then did the light return to his eyes. Only then did he see what he had done. The child was safe. She was hiding behind Ambassador Taiho, who was staring at Doyen with an expression he had never seen before. It was not fear. It was something else. It was wonder. "What are you?" the old man whispered. Doyen looked at his bloody hands. They were shaking. "I do not know," he said. "They escaped that day." Doyen led them through the Veth ship, and nothing could stop him. Doors broke under his fists. Soldiers fell before his rage. When they finally reached a shuttle and flew away, Yuna looked back at the Veth ship. "It was burning, Captain," she said quietly. "The Veth who escaped? They saw everything." "I know," Doyen replied. The story spread across the galaxy like fire through dry grass. A human had killed 7 armed Veth soldiers with his bare hands. A human had moved faster than their eyes could follow. A human had shown no fear, no hesitation, no mercy. The Veth who survived told everyone the same thing. His eyes went empty. He did not scream. He did not stop. For the first time in 10,000 years, the Elder Councils of the Galactic Concord called an emergency meeting. They gathered in their great hall, these ancient beings who had ruled the stars since before humanity learned to make fire. And for the first time in their long lives, they were afraid. They were afraid of a Class 7 primitive species. They were afraid of humans. 3 months passed, and the galaxy could not forget what happened on the Veth ship. The story changed with each telling. Some said Doyen killed 20 soldiers. Others said 50. Some whispered that he was not human at all, but something else wearing human skin. The truth was frightening enough, but fear always makes stories grow larger. The Galactic Concord did not know what to do. For 300 years they had ignored humanity. Now they watched them like hawks watching mice. They sent scientists to Earth. They sent observers to human colonies. They called it research, but everyone knew the real word. It was surveillance. Dr. Mingy stood in her laboratory on Earth and tried not to scream. She was a xenobiologist, one of the best on the planet. She had spent 20 years studying alien life forms. Now the aliens had come to study her, and she hated every moment of it. "Please extend your arm," said the Concord scientist standing before her. He was from a species called the Talon. They looked like tall insects with too many eyes. His voice was cold and flat, like he was examining a rock instead of a person. Minji extended her arm. The scientist took a sample of her blood without asking if it hurt. It did hurt. He did not care.
"Remarkable,"
he said, looking at the blood through a scanner. "Your healing rate is so slow. Your bones are so fragile. How does your species survive at all?" Minji wanted to tell him that humans survived by being clever and stubborn and refusing to die, but she stayed quiet. Arguing with Concord scientists was like arguing with walls. They heard nothing they did not want to hear. Across the city, Admiral Sunwoo stood at the window of his office and watched the alien ships hanging in the sky. He was 60 years old, a veteran of 3 colonial wars. He had fought pirates and raiders and things that had no names, but he had never felt danger like this. The Concord was afraid of humanity now. And afraid creatures did dangerous things. "It will try to destroy us," he said to himself. "Not today. Not tomorrow. But someday." He turned to his desk and began writing orders. Earth needed to prepare. The human colonies needed to prepare. Something was coming, and Sunwoo could feel it in his bones, in the basement of the Concord Archive building. A young woman named Hai-Hung was making a discovery that would change everything. Hai-Hung was an archivist. Her job was to organize old records and documents that nobody cared about. It was boring work, but she loved it. She loved the quiet. She loved the smell of old paper and ancient data crystals. Most of all, she loved finding things that had been forgotten. The Concord had built the archive on Earth 50 years ago. They said it was a gift to help humanity learn about the galaxy. In truth, it was a place to dump information they no longer needed. Millions of files sat in the basement, untouched for centuries. Hai-Hung was organizing these files when she found something strange. A sexio. End of the archive was sealed behind a security wall she had never seen before. The classification level was higher than anything she knew existed. The label simply said, "Earth's historical records do not access." She should have walked away. She should have reported it to her supervisors. But Hai-Hung was curious, and curiosity is a powerful thing. It took her 3 weeks to break through the security wall. She worked at night when the building was empty. She used every trick she had learned in 20 years of archiving. And finally, on a cold Tuesday evening, the files opened before her. What she read made her blood turn to ice. The records were 50,000 years old. They came from a time before the current Concord existed. When the galaxy was ruled by species that had long since died or disappeared, these ancient beings had discovered Earth. They had studied humanity, and they had been terrified. The files contained detailed reports on human biology. The ancient scientists had watched early humans hunt animals across endless plains. They had watched humans track prey for days without rest, never stopping, never giving up. They called this ability persistence predation. No other species in the galaxy had it. But there was more. The reports described something called adrenaline response. When humans faced danger, their bodies changed. They became stronger, faster. They could ignore pain. They could ignore fear. For a short time, they became something else entirely. The ancient scientists had a word for it. They called it battle rage. And then there was the worst part. The final conclusion of the report. Hai-Hung read it 3 times because she could not believe it was real. Recommendation: species designation, apex predator. Homeworld must be quarantined immediately. Contact forbidden. If quarantine fails, extermination recommended. This species must never be allowed to reach the stars. They are too dangerous. They adapt too quickly. They bond too strongly. Given time, they will become unstoppable. The quarantine had lasted almost 50,000 years. The galaxy had watched Earth from a distance and prayed that humans would destroy themselves. When humans finally reached space, the Concord had been shocked. The old records were lost by then, forgotten in archives nobody read. The scientists who examined humanity saw only weakness, slow healing, fragile bones, short lives. They thought humanity had changed. They thought the old danger was gone. They were wrong. Hai-Hung copied the files and ran to find Dr. Minji. She burst into the laboratory at midnight, shaking and pale. "You need to see this," she said. "You need to see this right now." Minji read the files. Then she read them again. Her hands were trembling when she finished. "They knew," she whispered. "They always knew what we were. They have been afraid of us for 50,000 years. Quarantine," Hai-Hung said. "They lifted it because they thought we lost our power. They thought civilization made us soft." Minji shook her head slowly. "We did not lose anything. We just forgot." Captain Do-Yin, on that Veth ship. He remembered. For just a moment, he remembered what we used to be. The 2 women looked at each other in the dim light of the laboratory. Around them, the alien equipment hummed and blinked. Somewhere above them, Concord ships filled the sky. "What do we do now?" Hai-Hung asked. Before Minji could answer, a message appeared on her communication device. It was from Admiral Sunwoo. The message was short. "Come to headquarters immediately. Bring what you found. Captain Do-Yan is on his way. He says he knows the truth. They went. 3 hours later, they sat in a secure room deep beneath Earth's surface. Admiral Sunwoo was there, his face hard as stone. Dr. Minji was there, her mind racing with possibilities. Ha-Yoon was there, still clutching her data crystal like a lifeline. And Captain Do-yoon was there. He looked different now. He looked older, though only 3 months had passed. There were shadows in his eyes that had not been there before. He had seen what he was capable of. He was still learning to live with it. I have been having dreams, he said quietly. Every night, since the Veth ship, I dream of running. I dream of hunting. I dream of things I cannot explain. And I keep asking myself the same question. What am I? Mingi handed him the data crystal. I think I have an answer. Do-yeon read the ancient files. His face did not change. When he finished, he looked up at the others. So we were always monsters, he said. No, Admiral Sunwoo replied. We were always predators. There is a difference. Monsters cannot control themselves. Predators choose when to hunt and when to rest. We forgot that we had a choice. Now we remember. Do-yeon was quiet for a long moment. Then he spoke again. Hey, the Concord is afraid. They will try to destroy us before we become a threat. Yes, Sunwoo agreed. Then we need to show them that it is already too late. Do-yeon stood up. His shadow seemed to fill the room. We need to wake up all of humanity. We need to remember who we are. Outside, the stars waited. The galaxy watched. And somewhere deep inside every human being, something ancient began to stir. 1 year had passed since Captain Do-jeon read the ancient files. 1 year since humanity learned the truth about itself. And in that year, everything changed. It started slowly, like water beginning to boil. A human worker on a mining colony lifted a collapsed beam that weighed 2,000 kilograms. He saved 3 of his friends. He could not explain how he did it. A human pilot, shot down over enemy territory, walked for 9 days through a frozen wasteland without food or water. When rescuers found her, she was still alive. She should not have been. Then the reports came faster. A human security guard fought off 12 armed robbers with her bare hands. A human doctor performed surgery for 40 hours without rest, saving every patient. A human child fell from a building and landed on her feet like a cat, unharmed. Scientists called it the resurgence. They did not understand it, but they could measure it. Human bodies were changing. Not their shape, but their potential. When pushed to the limit, when faced with true danger or desperate need, humans could do things that were supposed to be impossible. Sergeant Jiho experienced the resurgence on a border colony called Haven's Rest. He was 32 years old, a career soldier who had never seen real combat. That changed on a quiet morning in spring. Raiders attacked the colony without warning. They were not Veth, but a smaller group of pirates looking for easy prey. They expected frightened civilians and weak defenders. They expected surrender. They found Jiho. The first wave of raiders numbered 60. Jiho had only 5 soldiers under his command. They should have died in minutes. Instead, they fought for 6 hours. Jiho did not remember most of it. He remembered the sound of gunfire. He remembered the smell of smoke. He remembered the moment when a raider stabbed him in the shoulder, and instead of falling, he grabbed the blade and pulled it deeper so he could get closer to his enemy. When reinforcements finally arrived, they found Jiho standing alone in a field of bodies. His 5 soldiers had survived. The 60 raiders had not. How? The rescue captain asked him. How did you do this? Jiho looked at his bloody hands. They were shaking, but not from fear. I do not know, he said. I just knew I could not let them hurt my people. On Earth, a school teacher named Yoonji became a different kind of hero. She was 45 years old, small and thin. She had never been strong. She spent her days teaching children to read and write. The earthquake came without warning. It was not a large quake, but it was enough to collapse part of her school. Yoonji heard her students screaming under the rubble. She heard them crying for help. She did not wait for rescue. She did not call for assistance. She just started digging. The concrete slab that covered her students weighed over 3,000 kilograms. Engineers later confirmed this. No human being should have been able to move it. But Yanji did not know this. She only knew that her children were trapped and afraid. She lifted the slab. Her muscles screamed. Her bones ached. Blood poured from her nose and ears. But she lifted it, and she held it long enough for all 12 children to crawl free. When it was over, she collapsed. The doctor said she should have been dead. Her body had pushed past every known human limit, but she survived, and so did her students. Why did you do it? A reporter asked her later. How did you find that strength? Yanji smiled. Her arms were still wrapped in bandages. They were my children, she said simply. I could not let them die. Stories like these spread across human space. Every day brought new reports, new miracles, new proof that humanity was changing. The Concorde watched in growing horror. Their scientists ran tests and wrote reports. But they could not explain what was happening. One elderly scientist, Talon, who had studied humans for decades, finally admitted the truth. They were always capable of this, he said. Their potential was always unlimited. But they suppressed it. Civilization, comfort, safety, these things put the predator to sleep. Now the predator is waking up, and we cannot stop it. The Elder Councils met again and again. Some wanted to attack humanity before it was too late. Others wanted to make peace, to offer treaties and alliances. They argued for months while humanity grew stronger every day. On Earth, an old philosopher named Wu Bin became the voice of the resurgence. He was 90 years old, too weak to walk without help. But his mind was sharp, and his words were sharper. We are not becoming monsters, he told crowds of thousands. We are becoming what we always were. For 50,000 years, we forgot our true nature. We believed we were weak because others told us we were weak. But weakness was never our destiny. We were made for something greater. His words spread like fire. Humans everywhere began to believe. They began to push their limits. They began to remember Ambassador Taiho, old and tired but still burning with hope, requested permission to address the full Galactic Concorde. It was the first time a human had ever been given this honor. The Elder Councils agreed. Perhaps because they hoped he would offer surrender, he did not. Taiho stood before thousands of alien delegates in the Great Hall of the Concorde. His white hair gleamed under the lights. His hands did not shake. You kept us small because you feared what we might become, he said. His voice was calm, but it carried to every corner of the hall. For 50,000 years you watched us from a distance. You hoped we would destroy ourselves. You hoped we would stay primitive and weak. But we did not. He paused and looked around at the alien faces watching him. Some were hostile. Some were curious. Some were afraid. You know about the old records now, Taiho continued. We know you called us apex predators. We know you recommended our extinction. And we understand why. You were right to fear us. We are dangerous. We are capable of terrible things. The hall was silent. Every being held their breath. But you were also wrong, Taiho said. You thought strength and danger meant cruelty. You thought power meant destruction. You did not understand that humans choose what to do with their power. We can destroy, yes. But we can also protect. We can save. We can love so fiercely that we will tear apart the universe for those we love. He straightened his old back and lifted his chin. We are awake now. You cannot cage us. You cannot stop us. But we do not wish to be your enemies. We wish to be your equals. The choice is yours. He walked out of the hall without waiting for an answer. Behind him, chaos erupted. Some species demanded humanity's immediate destruction. Others rushed to contact Earth, offering secret alliances and treaties. Captain Dayun was appointed leader of a new human military council. He did not want war. He had seen too much blood already, but he would not allow his people to be destroyed. We will defend ourselves, he told the council. We will not start a war. But if war comes, we will end it. The Veth Dominion heard about the resurgence. They heard about Sergeant Jiho and his impossible battle. They heard about Yunji and her impossible strength, and they laughed. Humans are still weak, the Veth commander said. A few stories do not change what they are. We will prove it. It chose a target. A small colony called New Busan, home to 80,000 humans. It was a peaceful farming world, green and beautiful. It had almost no defenses. Only 200 soldiers protected it. The Veth sent 10,000 warships. They expected an easy victory. They expected to slaughter everyone and broadcast the images across the galaxy. They expected to prove that humanity was nothing special. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The sky above New Busan turned black with ships. 10,000 Veth warships blocked out the sun, casting shadows across the green fields and quiet villages below. 80,000 humans looked up and saw death coming for them. Sergeant Jiho stood at the front gate of the colony's main settlement. He had 200 soldiers behind him, 200 against 10,000 ships. The numbers were so absurd that some of his soldiers laughed. It was not a happy laugh. It was the sound of people accepting that they were going to die. Listen to me, Jiho said. He did not shout. He did not need to. Every soldier leaned closer to hear him. We cannot win this battle. We all know that. But we do not need to win. We only need to hold long enough for the civilians to escape. Every minute we fight is another minute for our people to survive. A young soldier raised her hand. Her name was Su Jin, and she was only 20 years old. How long do we need to hold, Sergeant? Jiho looked at the darkening sky. As long as it takes. In orbit above New Busan, Lieutenant Eunice sat in a damaged shuttle, watching the Veth fleet approach. Her communication equipment was still working, barely. Her weapons were destroyed. She could not fight, but she could think. She had been delivering supplies to the colony when the Veth arrived. Her transport ship was blown apart in the first minutes of the attack. She barely made it to a shuttle. Now she floated in the debris, invisible among the wreckage. And she had an idea. The Veth ships used a shared communication system. All 10,000 vessels talked to each other through a central network. It was efficient, but it was also a weakness. If she could hack into that network, she could cause chaos. Her fingers flew across the console. She had 14 hours before her air ran out. She intended to use every second. On the ground, the first wave of Veth soldiers landed. They numbered 5,000, heavily armed and hungry for blood. They marched toward the settlement in perfect formation, confident in their victory. Jiho watched them come. He felt something rising in his chest. It was not fear. It was something older, something primal. The same feeling Captain Doyan had felt on the Veth prison ship. Open fire, he said. The first shots caught the Veth by surprise. They had expected the humans to surrender. They had expected crying and begging. Instead, they found bullets and rage. The 200 human soldiers fought like nothing the Veth had ever seen. They did not retreat. They did not hide. When their weapons ran out of ammunition, they picked up rocks. When the rocks broke, they used their fists. They screamed as they fought, but they did not scream in fear. They screamed in fury. Jiho led every charge. He was shot in the first hour. The bullet went through his shoulder. He kept fighting. He was shot again in the second hour. The bullet cracked his ribs. He kept fighting. By the third hour, he had 7 wounds. Any one of them should have killed him. He did not stop. What are you? A Veth commander screamed at him. What are you? Jiho grabbed the commander by the throat and lifted him off the ground. Blood poured from his wounds. His eyes were empty and cold. I am human, he said. And then he squeezed. In orbit, Yuna finally broke through the Veth communication network. She could hear thousands of voices now, all speaking at once. Orders, reports, confusion. She smiled. She started small. She changed coordinates. She sent false reports. She told Veth ships that friendly vessels were enemies. Within an hour, 4 Veth warships had destroyed each other by mistake. Then she got creative. She broadcast the sounds of the battle on the ground across every Veth channel. She made sure every soldier on every ship could hear what was happening. She made sure they could hear humans laughing as they killed. Fear spread through the Veth, fleet like poison. The battle continued through the night. The Veth sent more soldiers. Wave after wave crashed against the human defenders, and wave after wave was thrown back. The civilians had been evacuating since the attack began. Thousands of people crowded onto transport ships and fled into space. They could see the battle from orbit. They could see the tiny group of soldiers holding the line against an army. A young boy pressed his face against a window and watched. "Mama," he said, "why did they not run away?" His mother held him close. Tears rolled down her face. "Because they are protecting us," she whispered. "Because they love us that much." By the second day, the Veth had lost 15,000 soldiers. 15,000 dead, killed by 200 humans. The Veth commanders could not understand it. It was not possible. It was not natural. "They will not die," one commander reported. "We shoot them, and they get back up. We stab them, and they keep fighting. One human killed 30 of my soldiers before we finally brought him down. And even then, he was still crawling toward us." The Veth began to retreat. Ships that had come for easy slaughter now fled in panic. But the human soldiers did not stop. They pursued the retreating enemy with the patience of predators who knew their prey could not escape. On the third day, Captain Do-yoon arrived with the human relief fleet. He had pushed his ships beyond their limits, burning through space at speeds that should have torn them apart. He had not slept in 70 hours. He had not eaten. He had only one thought in his mind: get to New Busan. When his fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel, he saw a sight that would haunt him forever. The Veth Armada was broken. Ships burned in orbit. Debris floated in clouds of wreckage. The great fleet of 10,000 had been reduced to chaos by one woman in a damaged shuttle and 200 soldiers on the ground. Do-hyun landed at the settlement. He walked through the battlefield in silence. Bodies covered the ground. Veth bodies, thousands of them. And among them, the human soldiers who had held the line. He found Jiho sitting against a wall, still alive, barely. The sergeant had more holes in his body than anyone could count. His uniform was red with blood, but he was smiling. "Captain," Jiho said. His voice was a whisper. "You are late." Do-yeon knelt beside him. "I came as fast as I could. The civilians. Safe. All of them." Jiho closed his eyes. The smile stayed on his face. "Good. That is good." When the medics finished their count, they found 14 human soldiers still alive. 14 out of 200. They had held for 3 days against an army. They had protected 80,000 civilians, and they had broken the Veth Dominion. The galaxy had watched the battle. Every species with eyes had seen the footage. They had seen humans fight with wounds that should have killed them instantly. They had seen humans laugh in the face of death. They had seen humans protect their families with a fury that made the stars. Themselves seem cold. No one called humanity a Class 7 primitive species anymore. Do-yeon stood in the ruins of New Busan as the sun rose over the smoking battlefield. Lieutenant Eunice stood beside him. She had barely escaped her shuttle before her air ran out. She looked exhausted, but her eyes were bright. "The galaxy is watching," she said softly. "They want to know what happens next." Do-yeon looked up at the stars. He thought about the ancient files that called humanity apex predators. He thought about the fear in alien eyes. He thought about the blood on his hands, and the blood on the hands of every human who had fought and died. Then he spoke the words that would echo across history. "We are awake now," he said, "and we remember everything we were made to forget." Across the galaxy, billions of beings heard those words. Some trembled in fear. Some wept with joy. Some began preparing for war. Some began preparing for surrender. But all of them understood one thing: humanity had returned, and the universe would never be the same. 5 years had passed since the Battle of New Busan. 5 years since humanity showed the galaxy what it truly was. In that time, everything changed and nothing changed. Humanity was now the most feared species in the universe. The old powers that once dismissed humans as weak and primitive now bowed their heads when human ships passed. Treaties were signed in humanity's favor. Resources flowed to Earth and its colonies. Anyone who had ever insulted a human quickly apologized. But fear is not respect, and power does not bring peace. Captain Doyon stood at the window of his command center, looking out at the stars. He was older now. Gray touched his hair. Lines marked his face. He had led humanity through its awakening, and the cost showed in his eyes. He saw the way aliens looked at humans now. It was the same way humans had once looked at wild animals. They smiled and spoke kind words, but underneath was terror. Pure animal terror. They expected humanity to turn on them at any moment. They expected violence and death. "We have become the monsters they always feared," Doyon said quietly. Dr. Mingy stood behind him. She had changed too. Her hair was white now, and her hands were tired from years of research. She had studied the resurgence from the beginning. She understood it better than anyone. "We have not done anything wrong," she said. "We only defended ourselves. I know." Dogon did not turn around. "But look at them. Look at how they run from us. Look at how they hide their children when we pass. We saved ourselves, but we broke something else. We broke their peace." The galaxy lived in fear now. Species that had fought each other for millions of years suddenly made alliances against the human threat. They've built weapons in secret. They whispered plans of surprise attacks. They knew they could not win against humanity, but they were so afraid that they were willing to try, and humanity was changing in other ways too. Young humans grew up knowing they were the strongest species in the universe. Some became arrogant. Some became cruel. They saw other species as weak, as inferior, as prey. Doyon had executed 3 human soldiers last year for crimes against aliens. 3 soldiers who had used their power to hurt innocent beings. He knew there would be more. Power corrupts. And humanity had more power than any species in history. Elder Wubin called a meeting. The old philosopher was 95 now, closer to death than life. He could barely stand. He could barely speak. But his words still carried weight, and when he asked the human council to gather, they came. The meeting was held on Earth, in a small room with plain walls. No decorations. No symbols of power. Just chairs and a simple table. Doyon was there. Dr. Mingy was there. Admiral Sunwoo, now retired and walking with a cane, was there. Ambassador Taiho, older than anyone else in the room, was there. And dozens of other human leaders filled the remaining seats. Elder Wubin stood with help from 2 assistants. His voice was weak, but the room was silent, and every word was clear. "We have remembered our power," he said. "But have we remembered our purpose?" No one answered. The question hung in the air like smoke. "I have watched humanity for 95 years, Wubin continued. "I have seen us at our worst and at our best. I have seen us destroy, and I have seen us create, and I have come to understand something important." He paused to catch his breath. His hands trembled on the table. "We were not made to rule others. We were not made to conquer. We were made to grow, to become, to reach for something beyond ourselves, and we cannot do that here." Murmurs spread through the room. Leaders looked at each other in confusion. "What are you saying?" Admiral Sunwoo asked. Wubin smiled. It was a tired smile, but also a peaceful one. "I am saying that we have 2 choices. We can stay in this galaxy and become exactly what they feared. We can conquer. We can rule. We can build an empire on the bones of species weaker than ourselves. Or ... He looked around the room, meeting every eye. "We can leave." The room exploded with voices. Some shouted in anger. Some shouted in shock. But Captain Doyon sat in silence, and something stirred in his heart. Something that felt like hope. The debate lasted for months. Humans across all colonies discussed the question. Should they stay and rule? Or should they go and find something new? In the end, it was not governments that decided. It was the people. A vote was held. The largest vote in human history. Every human over the age of 16 was allowed to choose. The result surprised. Everyone, 73%, voted to leave. Humanity would abandon the galaxy. They would find somewhere else to exist, somewhere they could grow without hurting others. Somewhere they could become whatever they were meant to become. The scientists worked day and night. Dr. Mingy led the research team. They studied dimensions and realities beyond the known universe. They built machines that could tear holes in space itself. And finally, after 2 years of work, they created a gateway. It was a ring of light floating in the darkness between stars. Through it, sensors detected another place. Another universe, empty of life, full of possibilities. A blank canvas waiting for humanity to paint on it. The departure took 1 year. Ships carried billions of humans through the gateway. Cities were emptied. Colonies were abandoned. Humans said goodbye to the stars they had known and walked toward stars they had never seen. On the last day, Ambassador Taiho broadcast a message to the entire galaxy. Every species with a receiver heard his voice. "We frightened you," he said. "Perhaps you were right to be frightened. We are dangerous. We are capable of terrible things, but we are also capable of mercy. We are capable of sacrifice. We are capable of walking away from power that most species would kill to possess." He paused. His old voice was steady and strong. "We leave you this galaxy in peace. Remember us not as conquerors, but as the species that chose to walk away. We do not know what we will become in our new home. Perhaps we will become gods. Perhaps we will become something else entirely. But whatever we become, we choose not to become your destroyers." He smiled into the camera. "Perhaps one day you will understand why. Until then, goodbye. And thank you for teaching us what we did not want to be." The broadcast ended. Across the galaxy, billions of beings sat in stunned silence. Captain Do Yoon was the last human to stand before the gateway. Everyone else had already passed through. The ships were gone. Earth was empty. The colonies were quiet. He looked back at the stars he had known his entire life. He thought about everything that had happened. The Veth prison ship. The ancient archives. The resurgence. New Busan. The fear in alien eyes. The blood on his hands. Lieutenant Yuna waited for him on the other side. He could see her through the light of the gateway, standing with arms crossed and a small smile on her face. "Are you ready?" she called. Doyan took one last breath of the universe he was leaving behind. He thought about what Elder Wubin had said. "We were not made to rule. We were made to become. We were never meant to rule them," he said softly to himself. "We were meant to outgrow them." He stepped through the gateway. The light wrapped around him like warm water, and then he was gone. Behind him, the gateway closed. The ring of light faded and disappeared. Where billions of humans had once lived, there was now only silence. The galaxy was quiet for the first time in 10,000 years. 1,000 years passed. Alien children were told stories of the humans. They became legends, then myths, then fairy tales. The species that had feared humanity eventually forgot that fear. New powers rose and fell. New wars were fought and won. Life continued. But some things were not forgotten. The eldest species, the ones who had lived since before humanity was born, still remembered. They told their children about the quiet species that remembered it was made of fire. They told them about the Battle of New Busan, where 200 held against 10,000. They told them about the day humanity chose to leave rather than rule. And sometimes, when the universe was very quiet, the oldest beings swore they could feel something strange. A vibration in the fabric of reality. A distant echo from beyond the edges of existence. Some said it was just their imagination. But others knew better. It was laughter. It was singing. It was the sound of a species still growing, still becoming, still reaching for something beyond the stars, somewhere impossibly far away. Humanity was still alive, and they were just getting started.